Welcome to our user meeting here. It's a group meeting, I guess. Hello, I'm Marcus, and I was forced to do compliance on Kubernetes, which is, if you come from a technical perspective, it's really a horror. But let's start. So this is our agenda. There is something beautiful here. That's our opera in Hamburg. So a really scenic spot there. I come from the Hamburg port. So just give me 30 seconds to introduce myself. Why is this crucial for us? Where technology is meeting compliance in our harbor. We talk really small about guidelines and standards that we're talking about. And then there is really the input of this talk. So we will conquer 10 checks, practical things you can do in your Kubernetes cluster to prove for auditors and others we are doing things right on the following standards and frameworks. Okay. So this is the port of Hamburg. This is in Germany, in the north of Germany, and we are Germany's largest seaport, which brings a little bit of complexity with it, and we hear all the complexity stuff in the keynotes. And we are Europe's largest rail port, so from a supply chain part, that's really an issue. Rail, inland, waterway, and lorry for the people from the Isle, or trucks. So we have this triple of things in the real world. Our claim is responsibility for safety and ease of a port stay. So we operate the port of Hamburg in the real world. For the digital world, we also embrace Kubernetes. So my team where I'm working in is the HKS/cloud team. So we're in the middle of a transition there. We have 3 platform engineers plus 1 solution side reliability engineer. We have around 30 clusters, hybrid environment, on edge, on-prem, as well as on the cloud. And the big thing here is we have autonomous product teams. So with all the compliance we're conquering, we need to rely on the autonomous product teams because we have internal as well as external developer parties that want to do everything they could do on the Kubernetes systems. And to make it even more worse, I'm from the public government, so the HPA is an official public government institution, and we operate critical infrastructure. So in Germany, there is some lot of compliance with it. So in the real world, we have guidelines for you, things that help you to measure, do I do it right or wrong, or what should I do? Things like this information port guide, if you, with all of our ships that we usually don't have, however. So if Jeff Bezos comes to us, he needs to comply to these guidelines and rules with his yacht, like 10 knots, under keel clearance, and so on. What we also have are standards in the digital world. And this is what we're coming back to the topic that we're talking now in here. So there was this time when someone from the management approached us and tell us, you know, guys, there will be some standards, some frameworks you need to comply with. Are we compliant to the following standards? And just a short rundown here. Because from a technical standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, most of us, I guess, are familiar with the CIS benchmarks, right? So a hardening guide, not like an international stuff, but in our technical engineering world, really a guide of how things should behave. So we take this one. From the United States, we have the National Institute of Standards in Technology. And this is a security control framework, so it's not particular for Kubernetes, but it belongs to us because it's an information system. So how can we conquer with that? Of course, we have the ISO, so Information Security Management Systems as a security control framework, and we're using here version 2022. And maybe you would like to come in our port and you park your ship on a quay, and the chances are good that you need to pay for that. And if you choose to pay for that by card, we need to be compliant with PCI DSS for credit card transfers, for instance. We have SOC 2. What is really interesting is the second novellation of the Network Information Security Framework, NIST, here in Europe. And this is like an upgrade we had some years ago. And of course, we have the GDPR. So in Germany, we like it DSGVO, which is exactly the same for private data. And with all of these running through our team, I was like, how can we be compliant? We're engineers. We are not supposed to, we are not auditors, and we are not looking like a lawyer, as far as I know. So what did we do to conquer this challenge? So first of all, we have pilots in our harbor, which is the German word Lotse. And what we do, we flip the script. We said, look at our best practices we do as a technical baseline, and then compare these technical best practices, how could they fit into the frameworks, into the standards we need to comply with. At the end, we should see some gaps in this metrics, and then we just fill in the gaps to be fully compliant. And on the last slide, I will tell you why this was really important to be compliant to frameworks, even if you're coming from a technical perspective. So here's the challenge. We have 10 checks. And after I did the complete slide deck, I was like, that should be a half-a-day workshop if we want to do it really right. So I boiled it down to 3 slides per check. So what you can see here is our first thing. We restrict the API server access, something we do usually with our people from the networking department. So nobody should talk unauthorized to the API server, our beloved Kube API server at port 6443. On the left side, you see always the frameworks we take on. And a little bit for that, here you see even chapters or chapters with chapter marks that are not definitive things. These are like, look in this chapter, there will be parts that you can be compliant to, because an ISO is not built for Kubernetes. So there is interpretation that you can have, but it's a good idea to look for. So how can we check this on the technical side? Relatively easy. It turns out, if we want to restrict the API server access, we have, in a vanilla Kubernetes way, the usual static manifest, Kube API server YAML, and we see how we bind the address and even the port of the API server, so 6443. And yes, we can change that, but however, if you change the default API port in production, it might be not a good idea because things might change for your K9S or something. This won't help you completely to restrict the access. We come to RBAC and so on later, but that's more like an, okay, we use this interface here and advertise the address. What you could also do is using network policies. We have an own check for that, so I will skip on that right now. And if you want to be really picky, think about the fundamentals of Kubernetes. We have an admission controller, right? Authorization, authentication, authorization, and the admission controller. And if you want to be really picky because it's highly critical, write a webhook and just always check which IPs are questioning some workload. And usually I would go on with all these checks. However, we are at TalosCon, and my idea was, how do we have a Talos fit in there? So what could you do, or what could ease your life if you adopt to Talos? And for this easy hardening thing, I looked at Talos and said, well, okay, from the API server access thing, how could we achieve this in a really easy way? And honestly, the biggest thing is we just have the Kubernetes API and the Talos API, as you all know, because you're here at the TalosCon. What we could do, because we don't have access anymore to the static manifests, we can go to the machine config and configure it there and push it to the control planes. So what we did, we pumped up these slides. So every time you see something blue, there's an hyperlink referencing to the documentation where you can look up how to configure that. So for point 1, we just hit the machine config. So that's like a little bit of warm up. And now we're going really into trenches. And as you can see, we have a large number of compliance frameworks and standards that we can tick a box here. Use your PSA. So we all know that policy, pod security standards are done. Pod security policies are done in a, I personally think in a good way. We have now the pod security standards. And we have the admission controller to enforce these standards, which help us with these frameworks then, because of reporting. There are 1 or 2 things you should remember. pod security admission controller is on by default since Kubernetes 1.25, which is great, hooray. However, if you ever tried it, you know you can enforce these groups or audit or whatever here with just labeling a namespace. My question is, what happens if you have this autonomous product teams that don't label their namespaces? What if you have a SOC or an other internal, like a CISO, that's forcing you to, but Marcus, how can we be sure that we force these people to do this? Well, it turns out if you don't label a namespace as a default action for this namespace is always privileged. So open doors, wonderful. This is the default behavior. So the next thing we thought is, can we change this default behavior? And a short look up in the Kubernetes documentation shows up. Yes, you can change the default security admission configuration by passing this as an argument. But it got more worse. When we thought about that idea, we tried to hack it and come around it in every possible manner. If you're able to log into your cluster, go to your control plane and go to etc Kubernetes manifest, which we all know are the usual static manifest files we have for the API server, etcd, and so on. As long as you put a YAML file in there, it gets passed by the PSA. We can sneak along. Well, for us, it was important, so we used the usual Falco trick of adding a Falco rule and say, hey, please, PSA violations spawn up and send us some information there. And if you would like to try that out, I have something here for the Talos Fit to fill the page. Underneath, you can see a malicious pod trying to do host network or getting the privileged security context. Don't worry, it will work as long as you put this under etc Kubernetes manifest. One moment, Talos has no shell access in this way, so we can't go there and put these things. With a little bit of work, it will work in some kind of way, but not for the usual script kiddie. Good. Well, another critical part that we are always using is, of course, you know, secrets like are just base 64 data. So etc encryption should be key for that. And yes, we use external secrets operator, for instance, but please bear in mind that on a vanilla Kubernetes, etc encryption is not available. It's not enabled by default. So how to change these? The usual thing, encryption provider config in the API server. So what you could do is configure with a simple YAML file what things should be encrypted, not encoded. And as you can see here, we have resources. So of course, you would say, every resource, every entry we have? Think about that. The etcd database comes with 2 GB in default and 4 GB in max for the size of the database. Is it really a good idea to encrypt and decrypt anything you have held into the database? Or we would like to filter that on, as you see here, Panda's awesome bear example, on CRDs or just on secrets and config maps. And if you go a little bit further, even the encryption mechanism can be specified. So here you have the chance to use different providers. If you want to dig a little bit deeper in there, there's also a link provided with encrypting confidential data at rest, even in the official Kubernetes documentation. What you see now that's coming be visible is a pattern. Everything we do on our daily lives as engineers will pay off with ticking some, not all, but some of the things we need to be compliant with in this standard and framework world. Of course, using the external service secrets operator would be nice, or come around this topic in different ways. If you go to a cloud provider, yay, we don't have these problems anymore, right? Did you ever ask Azure or Amazon or Google how you can encrypt their etc? I remember when we asked Google about that, they say you don't have access to the etcd, and it's not even an etcd. So we manage your control plane, but hands off. Then I need to find a solution for my auditor that comes by. So, where is the Talos fit? Well, it supports etcd encryption because it's just an upstream Kubernetes. We can integrate in other things. What I find really interesting on this way is not that we can do the etcd extra args and provide that in your machine config. This is more or less like the go-to on Talos. What I found interesting is that Talos even told me if they need to write something about etcd, we put that into var_lib etcd. So this is a point on your hard drive, on the machines where you need to look at if something's fishy. So, and even there, we have the same thing, a link to the documentation. So what you can see here is how to do it. Next up, the cruise is going on and on and on. Audit logs. Well, we don't need audit logs. You need them. I don't want to have them. I don't want to have all the data that I need. And the crucial part is, what do I need to log? Everything? Really? Do you really need like 10 terabytes for 19 days of something? So that's the questions. From a technical standpoint, the same thing. Let's have a look how to do it. Well, we have the usual suspects, the audit policy file and audit log path. And if we think about it a second time, these are all things until now that we do usually in a certified Kubernetes administration course, right? So if you ever, some kubestronauts maybe here, these are things we learn in the course usually, even on the foundational CKA level for the administrators. Ship your logs to some externals. Here you can see the policy that you would write. And as I told you, here we do it really, really low level. We say just the secrets we would like to log from a specific group, and the log level is really important. So here, the next link, when we talk about log levels, please consult your lovely Kubernetes documentation. We have different things like none, metadata, request, and response. So how granular you need to log all these things for your auditors, and be transparent even for your inside SOCs and so on, that you communicate on this side. How can Talos help us there? Maybe just a machine config? A little bit yes and no. Of course, we have the machine config with API server and extra args. So something we can set up. And something I would love to see on Omni to say just these are the paths that I would like to have. What I really like is that we have built-in examples in our Talos documentation for logging. So usually the logs are sprawled to stand it out. As you can see here with the Fluent Bit example, they guide you here through a nice example how to set up everything to store your log files. You don't want them on your Talos machine somewhere external, and even with the standards like Fluent Bit here, for instance. Almost through. Enforced network policies. As I told you, we talked about that. It was the first thing when I would like to harden the API server a little bit. Let's go deeper into enforced network policies. And we all know that we should have a deny all by default. Yes, but there was this autonomous product teams, and you know, they got their cluster, they have their own Argo CD, and they can do whatever they like because they're autonomous product teams. You know, you build it, you run it, you're, embrace, and so on. The easy thing is the default implementation underneath. That's the one we got all right in the exam, in the real life. What us gave us a headache was, okay, let's choose something like Cilium or Calico. And if you're on a cloud, did you ask, please, Mr. Cloud Provider, what kind of CNI do you provide? Because I want to use network policies. And if there are flannel guys here, I'm sorry. But we got you covered with the better versions than with kernel and so on. So you could use this power of network policies, but how can we implement that? Well, nothing we need to invent the wheel in a new way. We have Ahmed with this great repository of network policy examples. And what I really like is for everything he would show us here, and by the way, he did great talks for Google and so on this topic, we always have some kind of example how the traffic will flow and how the manifest should look like. However, Marcus, that's not enough. Me enforces you. How can we be sure that no one shall pass? Because if developers own the cluster, they can just delete the default network policy, right? They can, because in the namespace, they can do whatever they like. Now, the next trick. We use the generator from Kubernetes. So we use Kubernetes in general as a policy framework, which is the one thing good to go. I love the ideas of CEL that's coming now with the common expression language. I'm connected with the KubeWarden guys, but this is what we're using. And the idea behind that is to say, okay, tamper with the default network policy. We don't care because we synchronize and generate some new with this template here. So even if they fiddle around with that, what they can do the change, Kubernetes hook in and say, nope, back to basics, which is really helpful. On the other side, it can make some kind of friction between the platform team and the developer teams, but more. So use the generating part. And Talos, okay, honestly, the good news is, and I personally like that really, if you want to go with kubespan, by default, if you want to go with Cilium or Calico, you are allowed to. It's vanilla upstream Kubernetes. So go with your favorite CNI. And we have the isovalent guys here, and Raphael. And if you want to learn more about, there are some great labs from isovalent here. And we have no host level networking bloat, so we have just minimal OS. So even if you think about with your operation people, what's there, it's no big deal. Go with network policies. I'm really sorry, it doesn't make really, it is not the task that I usually would like to do every day, but when you enforce it, it helps a lot. And this was a tricky one as well. You always think you know your Kubernetes. And I use this Kubernetes now since 1.12. I was in the struggle here with using Kubernetes on-prem as well as in the cloud in managed systems. And this one caught me on a bad side. Use non-anonymous access to the API server. Ensure that you set that. And least privileged RBAC. Least privileged RBAC, really easy from the mind, right? I will grant the following service account, the following user, the following privileges in Kubernetes for the following API resources. Okay, but anonymous access, Marcus, we don't have a problem. It's not that simple. If you set this first bullet point into your API server, anonymous authentication is false. It's not allowed. If this is not in your API server, you can try to connect. Oh yes, Marcus, you can try to connect, we're good. Yes, and we don't get anything back because it says you're not allowed to do this because of RBAC. This is correct. However, let's look under the covers. What you can see here is the request goes through the API server and it got mapped to the username system anonymous and the group system unauthenticated. And hopefully nobody in your cluster is tampering with the RBAC for this user or this group. So the chance to get this wrong by not just closing the door at the front gate, So therefore you should audit your rules. You can do this the hard way with kubectl get roles. cluster roles and namespaces, maybe exports them. Or we have this nice ecosystem. You remember the landscape. And yes, we have something called RBAC View as a free plugin, right? If you're using Crew, for instance, then there are over 100 plugins. We saw RBAC View, what in our idea is ideal for bridging the gap between engineers and management people. This doesn't bring the perspective to management people. This is how it should be configured. Bless you. That's Europe. Huh? It's not sunny California, but straight good rainy weather. But it helps to visualize what you're doing. And one of the biggest things we had as an impact for getting compliant with standards and frameworks is making things visible to our CIOs, CTOs, or C-level. So this is even good if you want to do documentation. Good. The Talos fit, we have no SSH. We can't tempering there. RBAC is the only access method. Usually, there are cool things where you can RBAC with the Talos API and combine these. Please refer to the documentation there. We have the certificate rotation, usually on Kubernetes as well. And please disable anonymous auth. And here you can have the direct link to the documentation as well. Good. So let's have a look. Oh my gosh. So we should buckle up. Honestly, scanning images for vulnerabilities. Okay, that's nothing new, Marcus. That's, I mean, almost the last half year we're talking about that, and the years before. So yes, that's correct. It's not directly into the Kubernetes ecosystem. You can go with your typical Trivy or Claire or whatsoever things. For us, we decided to go with image signing, so we can only use signed images with cosign for this matter. And for the last half year, we implemented SBOMs now, so SBOM management. And there is an extra tick because in Europe we have the Cyber Resilience Act that got into place last year in autumn. So the clock is ticking there as well, so here's the link for that. What we can see here is if you create an SBOM, that's usually something that you need to put into your pipeline. However, the same principle applies. I have a problem, autonomous product teams, right? Hey, you need to put that into your pipeline. No, Marcus, I don't think so. So our site reliability engineer came up with this idea of central cyclone. We released that, or he released that 4 weeks ago now. We had a tremendous reaction from the community. So this one, centrally, pull your repository, do the scans for .NET, for Node, for Go, for whatever, even Java people, and create the SBOM and import that into the SBOM management system we're using. And honestly, how can we fit that in with Talos? Well, Talos don't have a machine config for that, only run signed images. If you try to Google that, you might get an idea that some GPT will tell you that it works, but it will not. So go with your 6-door policy or so on. What you could do, you can restrict registries. There is this air-gapped part in Talos documentation where we say, if you want to go to Docker.io, this is your endpoint you're using. Maybe you can build something with that. Number 8, and I have 5 minutes. Oh, this will be a close call. Enable automatic updates for Kubernetes components. Woo. And the CIS hardening framework is not a part for that tick, which was for us like, but there shouldn't be a sentence like, use always the latest and greatest. It's not in the CIS guide. Good, so for all of you that are still using it manually, go with your kubeadm upgrade. Have fun. Maybe you have managed Kubernetes, click or call the upgrade method. If you're running on Cluster API, welcome. We not. We created our clusters 4 years ago with a templating mechanism, so we are not on the cluster API party, we are more on the templating API party, which works there as well. But don't underestimate your service catalog. Usually the Helm umbrella charts you are providing from the platform team to all the developers, there are crucial components like external secrets operator, cert manager, and so on. These needs to be updated regularly as well. And of course, look into the release documentation. How does Talos fit in? And honestly, this was so good because we have these immutable updates. We have this A and B partition. So even a rollback is just a reboot from the machine, which I really admire. We have no package manager bloat. And what you could do, you can go into the machine config and add the new image names there. Or if you would like, you can do it even on the command line interface. So with just sending this to my Talos cluster, I can update to version 1.11 with a glance. If it doesn't work, do your rollback. It will start the B partition, and we're good. Well, and then we are almost done. So this is now the time where you can take a deep breath after all these compliance hassles, and this is just a little bit for, ease the thing. So we have no framework for the topic of immutable pods and read-only root file systems. But what I can tell you is just rethink your ideas, use your GitOps powers, things. So we have Argo CD, we have Flux, we have all these other things. Go with them. Don't do patching on YAML files. Do it with the GitOps pattern. Just create things new, replace instead of modify. And I don't know if you know it or not, but config maps and secrets can be immutable. Just pass the immutable thing, so you can't change them. No update, no patching allowed. You need to delete them and create them. And this, in combination with your audit log file, gives you a clue what's going on. Well, we leave out, because of the time constraints, the read-only thing. If you want to have really traction with your development teams, force the read-only root file system on your images. Good. The last one, and then we're always good, and almost. Backup etc, D, and test the disaster recovery. And then 2 things happened. First of all, yes, we have in the NIST and all the other documentations that you should do etcd backups. You remembered when you have a managed service that might be not part of your job because you can't even access the etcd? So usually I would go on and say etctl, snapshot, save, But it turns out what I did all the years was not okay now, these days, because we have a sibling, it's etcd-utl, where you do all the stuff right now, referring to the documentation. Have a recovery playbook, or use professional tools like Valero, Custom, or something else. The important part here was we were going to our internal operations and said, we would like to do this recovery drill book to be compliant with the standards and frameworks and so on. And they said, yeah, but on which machines? Even if you don't have the infrastructure for that, utilize the cloud and try out the IaaS offerings there to even create a recovery playbook. Well, on my dear Talos, at the end, it's just Talos CTL or Talos Cuttle or Talos Control, whatever, etcd snapshot save, and you're good, as well as the recovery. Hopefully, you have at least 3 control planes, and you don't need that, honestly, because you have the other ones, and that should do this job. However, we have this matrix where you can see all the things and how they combine now with our journey. Now we are at the end of our journey. Thank you very much. We need a strong technical baseline as a conclusion to go into the mapping of standards and frameworks to be compliant with. Standards aren't the end, there is a means. What we have here is I can go to my CIO and say, yes, we have a secure Kubernetes cluster because we comply to X, Y, and Z, to the CIS benchmark, to ISO, and so on. Security metrics going to be visible, and that's important for the management, not only for us as engineers. With this, thank you very much for this hell of a ride through 10 checks. I hope you learned something new. My name is Marcus Ross. I'm the CCOE lead. And Port is what we do. Thank you.